Imagine a professional architectural photographer named Greg van Riel. Greg built a solo business over decades, the kind where you control every detail, every shot, every client, every decision. He was successful, respected in his field, booked out months in advance. You can see his stunning work at gvrpix.com, gvrpix.com. Architectural photography that captures spaces with precision and artistry. But here's what was missing before Greg took one step that forever changed his perspective. Listen to how Greg describes it. Your insights, contributions, and suggestions have a unique way of getting right to the heart of an issue. This has been very helpful to me. In other words, for the first time, Greg had someone witnessing his thinking, not judging it, reflecting it back, getting to the heart of what actually matters in the decisions he was facing. But here's what really shifted for Greg. It wasn't just the tactical help. It was something deeper, something that touched how he saw himself and what he believed was possible. Most helpful was your suggestion about being very specific during affirmations to create powerful mental images, especially when it comes to manifesting certain exact amounts of money. This has helped me to improve my cash flow. More than that, his belief about what was possible shifted. Greg said something I want you to hear. Of course, this letter would be incomplete without expressing my appreciation for one of your greatest attributes. Your excellent sense of humor is a reminder not to take myself too seriously. Humor is essential to the enjoyment of life. That's not the language of tactical business coaching. That's the language of permission. Permission to be a whole human, not just a high performer grinding alone. In this episode, we're going to explore the invisible structure that created that shift for Greg and what 35 years of cognitive science and education research says about why it works. It's not what you think, and it might change how you approach building your practice from this point forward. Stay with me.
Welcome to the Doctor's Mentor Show. If the right to practice medicine without interference is important, and you want expert tips for practice freedom and profits to support your epic life, welcome aboard and prepare to be blown away. The Doctor's Mentor Show starts now. Here's your host, Dr. Lori Barr.
Today, we're tackling something I notice in almost every conversation I have with independent practice owners, whether they're physicians, dentists, chiropractors, or, like Greg van Riel, creative professionals who've built solo enterprises. And the paradox goes like this. The skills that make you excellent at building your practice alone, independence, decisiveness, the ability to trust your own judgment, resilience through uncertainty, those exact same skills can become a ceiling, not a floor, a ceiling. You can make every decision correctly and still feel lost. You can execute flawlessly and still wonder if you're building the right thing. You can be respected in your field and still doubt yourself daily. This is different from burnout, by the way. Burnout is exhaustion. This is something else. It's the loneliness of the unwitnessed achievement. The isolation of never hearing a partner or a peer say, yes, you're on the right track. That decision made sense. You're not crazy. In chiropractic, medical, and dental training, we talked about this a little bit. You had attendings who witnessed your work. You had peers in your residency cohort. You had faculty who could say, here's what I learned when I faced something similar. But the moment you hang out your own shingle, the moment you become the owner-operator, that structure vanishes. And most of us never replace it. We replace it with nothing, or we try to replace it with generic business coaching, which misses the nuance of what we're actually navigating. Or we replace it with social media, where we see other practitioners' highlight reels and feel worse, not better. Greg van Riel faced that exact situation. Decades into a successful architectural photography business, he realized something was missing. Not money, not respect, not competence. Something he couldn't quite name. Something that showed up as a whisper, not a scream. A sense that excellence alone wasn't enough, that there might be something more to building a business and a life than grinding alone. And what Greg discovered, what we're going to explore today, is the thing that he was missing. It had a name. 2 names, actually, depending on where you look in the research literature. One comes from Napoleon Hill, writing in 1937. The other comes from 2 cognitive anthropologists, Jean Lave and Etienne Wenger, writing in 1991. And understanding both and understanding the difference between them might be the most important decision you make about how you build your practice in 2026 and beyond. Let's start with Napoleon Hill. In 1937, Hill published Think and Grow Rich, one of the most influential and most misunderstood business books ever written. Most people remember Hill for his ideas about visualization and positive thinking. But buried in that book is a concept Hill believed was the most powerful of all, the mastermind. Hill defined the mastermind as an alliance of 2 or more people blended in a spirit of perfect harmony and unified in their belief toward a definite chief aim. Not a group of people with the same opinion. An alliance of people who coordinate their knowledge, experience, and effort toward a clear purpose. Hill believed, and he wrote about this extensively, that when 2 intelligent minds coordinate toward a goal, a third mind emerges, a combined intelligence that neither person possesses alone, access to insights, courage, and persistence that the individual couldn't summon by themselves. He gave examples. Business magnates who coordinated with trusted advisors, inventors who brought together complementary expertise, married couples who moved from conflict to coordinated vision. The mastermind, according to Hill, wasn't optional for achievement. It was foundational. If you've ever read the Bible, you might remember a scripture that starts, "Where 2 or more are gathered." I wonder if that's where Hill got his inspiration. Now, I've been facilitating masterminds for over 30 years, since the early 1990s, and I can tell you, Hill was onto something profound. When you bring together the right people in the right structure with the right intention, something shifts, not just in what they achieve, but in who they become. Fast forward to modern times, and we've finally gotten rigorous research on what happens when physicians step into a coordinated group, a modern version of Hill's mastermind. A randomized clinical trial published in JAMA Network Open found that when physicians received 3 months of coaching from professionally trained physician peers, they showed statistically significant reductions in burnout, interpersonal disengagement, and improvements in professional fulfillment and work engagement. Not marginal improvements, significant ones, measurable changes in how they experienced their work. In another study, a physician-focused peer support program at a large integrated health system, which is essentially a mastermind designed specifically for doctors, reached hundreds of physicians and was associated with improvements in perceived well-being and departmental culture. The physicians themselves reported that having a confidential physician-to-physician space normalized their struggles and reduced their sense of isolation. So Hill's 1937 institution is now backed by 2024 neuroscience and epidemiology. The mastermind works. But here's where it gets interesting, and where I think Hill maybe was incomplete. There's a newer framework built on actual learning science that explains why the mastermind works and what conditions make it work best. And that's where Jean Lave and Etienne Wenger enter the story. In 1991, 2 cognitive anthropologists, Jean Lave and Etienne Wenger, published research on how learning actually happens in the world, not in classrooms, but in real communities. They were studying apprenticeships, tailors learning their craft, midwives learning their practice, insurance claims processors learning their trade, and they noticed something fascinating. The apprentices weren't learning because they attended a class or read a manual. They were learning because they were embedded in a community of people doing that work. Isn't that kind of what we do in medical school and in residency and fellowship? Isn't that what we continue to do as we get on the job, continuing education, and consult our peers? The apprentices weren't learning because they attended a class or read a manual. They were learning because they were embedded in a community of people doing that work. They started at the periphery, watching, asking questions, doing simple tasks, just like a med student might, and gradually moved toward the center, toward mastery, like when you graduate from your fellowship, as they participated more and more in this actual work. Lave and Wenger called this a community of practice, a group of people bound together by a shared domain of interest or concern who learn from each other through participation and interaction over time. Now, here's the key difference from Hill's mastermind. A community of practice isn't primarily about coordination toward a goal, though that can be part of it. A community of practice is about shared learning and identity within a domain. It's about belonging to a group where people speak the same language, face the same challenges, and gradually internalize the norms, the wisdom, the unspoken knowledge of that group. When you join a community of practice, you're not just getting advice, you're becoming part of a culture. I've spent over 3 decades facilitating both types of groups, masterminds focused on rapid goal achievement and communities of practice focused on sustained learning and identity development. And I can tell you, they work differently and they serve different needs. Fast forward to recent years, and healthcare systems and medical practices are now designing formal communities of practice, and the outcomes research is compelling. A 2024 study published in PLOS ONE examined communities of practice specifically designed for healthcare improvement and found that they were particularly effective at improving knowledge sharing and creating sustainable change. Another 2024 study looked at co-designed communities of practice where the members themselves helped shape the structure and purpose and found significant improvements in participant engagement, confidence in their abilities, and implementation of new practices in their own settings. Why does this work? Because a community of practice operates on a principle that Hill intuited but didn't fully articulate. You don't learn from people who are ahead of you. You learn from people who are beside you in the same struggles. The accountant learns from other accountants navigating the same regulations. The architectural photographer, like Greg van Riel, learns from other creatives solving similar business challenges. The practice owner learns from practice owners running similar businesses, not from a generic business coach who has never signed a payroll check for healthcare staff or dealt with prior authorization denials. It's the legitimate peripheral participation that Lave and Wenger described. You start on the periphery, listening and observing. Over time, through participation, you move closer to the center. You ask more sophisticated questions. You contribute your own insights. You become known as someone with expertise within that domain. And here's the part that most people miss. That movement from periphery to center is itself transformative. It's not just that you learn better practices. It's that you develop a new sense of identity. You're no longer an isolated practitioner wondering if you're on the right track. You're a member of a community and recognized as an expert in that community. You're part of a culture, someone whose voice matters. That's what happened to Greg van Riel. So we have 2 concepts, Hill's Mastermind from 1937 and Lave and Wenger's Community of Practice from 1991. They're related, but they're not the same, and understanding the difference is crucial. The mastermind excels at coordination and goal acceleration. When you bring together a group of people explicitly aligned around a clear objective and they commit to showing up regularly, being vulnerable, holding each other accountable, momentum happens fast because of that collective consciousness that forms. In the JAMA study I mentioned, physicians in coordinated peer coaching saw measurable improvements in professional fulfillment within 3 months. That speed matters when you're carrying a heavy load and you need relief now, not eventually. The mastermind also creates what I call compressed feedback. A physician tells the group about a clinical or business decision, and she immediately hears from peers who faced something similar. She doesn't have to figure it out over 3 years of solo trial and error. She gets the insight now. That's the acceleration value of the mastermind. The community of practice excels at culture change and sustainable identity shift. A community of practice is slower to form. It takes time for trust to build, for the domain to become clear, for people to find their place within it. But once it's established, it creates something more durable, a sense of belonging that persists even when individual circumstances change. A 2024 study of healthcare communities of practice found that members reported not just improved practices, but improved sense of efficiency and confidence in their own expertise. That's identity shift. That's not just learning a new technique. That's becoming someone who belongs to a community of practitioners who share your values and your understanding of what good looks like. The community of practice also excels at institutional learning. When a group of practitioners who work in the same domain, say practice owners navigating independent healthcare, gather regularly to learn from each other's experience, the collective knowledge in that group becomes an asset. That domain knowledge doesn't evaporate when one person leaves. It's held by the community. So here's the real insight. A well-designed mastermind operates like a high-powered consultation. A well-designed community of practice operates like a professional home. A mastermind asks, how do we accelerate toward this goal together? A community of practice asks, who are we becoming as we participate in this domain together? And here's where it gets really interesting. After 30 plus years of facilitating both types of groups, I've learned that the most transformative experiences happen when you combine elements of both. You get the coordination and goal acceleration of the mastermind, clear quarterly objectives, accountability, rapid feedback on decisions. But you're embedded in a community of practice, a circle of healthcare providers who share your exact domain, who speak your language, who understand the regulatory constraints, the staffing challenges, the insurance frustrations that generic business coaches completely miss. You're not just coordinating toward a revenue goal. You're becoming part of a community of practice owners who've asked, what is a profitable practice that also honors my time, my values, and my creative energy? That question shapes everything. So what was the experience for Greg van Riel? Before stepping into a coordinated group of practitioners, Greg was operating in what we might call entrepreneurial isolation. He was excellent, booked solid, respected. You can see the caliber of his work at www.gvrpics.com. Architectural photography that demonstrates mastery of craft. But Greg was carrying all the decisions alone. Should I take on this project? Is this client worth my time? Am I building the business I actually want, or just the one that pays the bills? That's the isolation that even competent, capable, solo practitioners face. Not a lack of skill, a lack of witness. Now, when Greg stepped into one of my weekly mastermind calls, a structured group with clear rhythm and a commitment to showing up, something shifted. Not his workload, not his client list initially, but his experience of making decisions. Here's what Greg said. Your insights, contributions, and suggestions during our weekly calls have a unique way of getting right to the heart of an issue. That has been very helpful to me. That's the acceleration value kicking in. In a weekly call, Greg could bring a decision, something he'd been mulling alone for weeks, and get real grounded feedback from people who understand the challenges of running a creative business, his mastermind partners. But it went deeper than that. Greg also talked about how the group helped him shift his internal beliefs about what's possible when he said, "You suggested I read Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. This book has had a profound effect on me, which has enabled me to shift an old lack paradigm and substantially improve my self-image in that area." And then, your suggestion about being very specific during affirmations to create powerful mental images, especially when it comes to manifesting certain exact amounts of money, has helped improve my cash flow. Notice what's happening here. This isn't just business strategy. This is identity work. This is Greg saying, I shifted how I see myself, and that shift changed my results. That's the community of practice at work. Greg wasn't just learning a tactic, he was participating in a culture where people ask deeper questions. Who do I need to become to build what I want? What beliefs are limiting me? How do I cultivate the internal state that matches the external results I'm after? And here's what really landed with me, the thing that tells you everything you need to know about what a true mastermind mixed with community of practice does. Greg said, "Your excellent sense of humor is a reminder not to take myself too seriously. Humor is essential to the enjoyment of life. That's not an outcome you measure. You can't put that on a spreadsheet, but it's the most important outcome there is. Because once you're in a community where someone models that, where they show you that you can be ambitious and joyful, rigorous and playful, that you can pursue excellence without taking yourself so seriously that you lose the point of being alive, something releases. You stop performing. You start being. And that's where the real innovation happens. That's what Greg experienced, and it's what's available to you. Let me be direct about why I'm bringing this up now. The environment for independent healthcare practice owners has fundamentally changed in the last 5 years. Regulations are tightening. AI is reshaping clinical workflow. Staffing is harder. Insurance denials are more aggressive. The solo practitioner model, the figure it out alone approach that served many of you well for the first decade, or two even, that approach is increasingly difficult to sustain with peace. You can keep grinding alone. Many practitioners are, but the research is clear. The grind extracts a cost. Burnout, strained relationships, loss of the creative spark that made you fall in love with your work in the first place. Or you can step into what research has proven works. Coordination with peers who understand your exact world in a structure designed to accelerate your thinking and your decision-making, while also anchoring you in a community of practitioners asking the same questions. This isn't new. Hill was writing about this in 1937. Lave and Wenger documented it in 1991. Modern healthcare research confirms it in 2024. What is new is how accessible it's become to design this kind of structure intentionally. You don't have to wait for your professional association to organize it. You don't have to stumble into it accidentally. You can step into it by choice. And that choice, that's where the real transformation begins. So here's what I want to let you know about. I'm currently writing my book that talks about combining these practices. It's called Make Up Your Mastermind. And that's what I invite you to contribute to with me.
Your next step.
If you have questions about how a high-performance mastermind works, if you have questions about building a community of practice, I want to know your questions, and I want to know exactly how a mastermind has served you. You can communicate with me directly at Lori@thedoctorsmentor.com. And aside from that, I want to give you two other options that you can act on right now, because I genuinely believe both can work depending on where you are. Option one is to start your own mastermind. If you have 2 or 3 trusted colleagues, whether they're in your exact field or in adjacent healthcare practices, or even professions from outside of medicine, You can start a mastermind group right now. One Zoom call per month, 1 hour, 3 to 5 people is a way to start. I personally think weekly meetings accelerates the process. It accelerates that community of practice. So if you can commit to getting together once a week, even better. The structure is simple. Each person gets 15 minutes to share something they're navigating, a business decision, a clinical challenge, a team issue. The group listens really with intention, like with an empty mind where everything that person is saying, both with their words and with their expressions, comes into the listener and reflects back what they hear. No advice unless asked, just thoughtful witnessing and asking clarifying questions. After 3 people have shared, you debrief together. What came up? What patterns did you notice in the group? That's it. That's a community of practice or a mastermind in its most basic form. The research shows that even informal peer groups reduce perceived isolation and improve decision confidence, particularly when they're consistent and confidential. You don't need a fancy curriculum. You don't need a facilitator, though having someone with experience helps. You need commitment to showing up and permission to be honest. If this resonates, I'd encourage you to think about 2 or 3 colleagues this week and ask yourself, would we be willing to create something like this together? Start there. See what happens. Option 2, step into an intentionally designed hybrid mastermind. If you're ready for more structured acceleration, if you want the mastermind elements, clear quarterly goals, real accountability, rapid feedback, and that deep, heartfelt listening, that loving kindness that only comes from developing a mature mastermind, plus the community of practice elements, a circle of healthcare providers in your exact domain, facilitated by someone who's been doing this and is actively practicing for over 3 decades, then what we've built at the Doctor's Mentor might be exactly what you're looking for. Our Practice Growth Mastermind is designed as a hybrid model that brings together the best of both frameworks. It combines mastermind acceleration, clear quarterly objectives, weekly accountability through co-working sessions, real-time feedback on business decisions, and monthly mastermind accelerators where the collective intelligence of the group tackles your biggest challenges. Community of practice depth, a circle of no more than 30 healthcare providers, physicians, dentists, chiropractors, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, and practice owners who understand the regulatory environment, the staffing challenges, the insurance frustrations, the clinical constraints you navigate. Facilitated by experience. I've been facilitating masterminds and communities of practice for over 30 years. I know what works, what doesn't, and how to create the conditions for transformation. And I am constantly learning new techniques to influence your subconscious mind so that you transform into who you need to be to have the goals you desire for yourself. It's not a course. You don't sit passively watching videos. It's a working community where your thinking and your successes and your failures are witnessed and refined as you work with people who care about your success because they're on a similar journey. The outcomes we see are consistent with the research. Practitioners report improved clarity on their business direction, reduced sense of isolation, sustainable changes in how they structure their time and their practices, and, like Greg van Riel, a recovery of joy and humor in their daily work. What shifted for Greg? The clarity, the confidence, the sense of direction, the permission to be playful while pursuing excellence. That's what happens when you combine the mastermind model with the community of practice framework. Now, I know that joining a year-long mastermind is a significant decision, so we've created something for you to experience this before you commit. It's called Discovery Day. Discovery Day is your chance to attend the first day of one of our quarterly 2-day implementation getaways that's part of our Practice Growth Mastermind, and you attend as a guest. You'll experience exactly what it feels like to be in a room with peers who understand what you're facing. You'll participate in the structured communication methods, the interactive learning, the hot seat sessions. You'll see if this community is the right fit for you. And it's fully refundable if you attend and decide it's not for you. If you're curious, head to thedoctorsmentor.com/discovery day. That's thedoctorsmentor.com/discovery day. Click the button to apply, and we can have a conversation to see if this fits for you. You don't have to decide about the full mastermind today. What you need to decide is, are you willing to invest one day to see if there's a better way? The goal is to create a community where transformation happens naturally, the way it did for Greg van Riel. Before we close, I want to offer something. If you've been carrying your practice decisions alone, if you've been wondering if you're on the right track, if you've felt the isolation of being a competent, capable practitioner with no peers to witness your work, that's not a personal failing. That is a system failure, a structural absence, and it's fixable. You don't have to figure this out by yourself. You never had to. Napoleon Hill knew that in 1937. Levin Wenger documented it in 1991. Modern research confirms it in 2024. And after over 30 years of facilitating both masterminds and communities of practice, I can tell you with certainty, the mastermind works. The community of practice works. And when they're combined thoughtfully in a hybrid model that honors both goal acceleration and identity transformation, they create something even more powerful. A place where your thinking is accelerated, your decisions are refined, and your sense of isolation dissolves because you're anchored in a community of practitioners who truly get it. Start small if that's where you are, a monthly peer call with colleagues you trust, or step into something more structured if you're ready. Experience Discovery Day and see what's possible. Either way, the invitation stands. You don't have to build alone anymore. That was Greg van Riel's discovery, and it could be yours too. I'm Dr. Lori Barr. Remember, one idea is all it takes to change your world.
You're listening to The Doctor's Mentor, hosted by Dr. Lori Lee Barr. Podcast content is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended for the purposes of curing, diagnosing, preventing, or treating any disease or medical condition. Information found or received through the podcast should not be used in place of a consultation or advice from a healthcare, legal, or accounting professional. If you suspect you have a medical problem or you should have any healthcare questions, please promptly call or see your healthcare provider. Carefully read all labels and heed all directions and cautions that accompany products or services. Before using any strategies, activities, or products referenced in this podcast, consult with your lawyer, accountant, or medical professional. The Doctor's Mentor was created by Dr. Lori Lee Barr. It is owned by Peak Idea, LLC, executive producer, Dr. Stephen Dent, audio-video engineer, Richard Dent. The company, Dr. Lori Lee Barr, and the producers disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about the qualifications or credibility of guests. Opinions of Dr. Lori Lee Barr are her own. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements from products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services mentioned. Remember, one idea is all it takes to change your world.
There's more to explore at thedoctorsmentor.com.